Hi, I'm Mr. Sauve. Welcome to Introduction to Screen Printing 101. Today we're going to talk about some of the really basic parts of the process where we basically choose a screen and we're going to make sure that it's really clean. We're going to get any contaminants from the outside of the screen, like things you can't see like grease and fingerprints and dust off the surface of the screen using some special products that we have, and as well as a simple scrub brush in the sink. So that's what we're going to look at first. So you might notice that in this shot I've got some safety glasses on and I've also got some rubber gloves on. These are a really good idea at this point because we're going to be handling some screens down here, some of which may or may not be cleaner than others. There are some examples here of some screens that are well cleaned and you probably wouldn't get much on your hands, but also you're going to see some that have a good amount of ink all over the sides. And I'll show you just a quick example here of one that's got all kinds of ink all over it here. And you can already see my hands here. This is a really good illustration of why we should probably wear them. Also, this one, definitely not cleaned out, not blasted out well. We're going to try and have this not happen when we're done with our screen. So at this point, you're ready to choose your screen that you're going to be actually screen printing on. And you're going to want to look for one, like I said earlier, that's clean. You may see kind of like the ghosted image of the previous design in there, and that's perfectly fine. As long as we don't have any major tears or chunks of stencil all over the place or big chunks of ink, your screen should work just great for the next step. We're actually going to be heading over to the sink where we're going to be scrubbing clean the actual printing surface here on the screen and getting it ready to apply some stencil to it. Alright, so we have our screen picked out. We brought it over here to the sink, and we have a couple things that we're going to want to make sure at this point. You want to have safety glasses on because I am going to be using a chemical at this point. It's this stuff right here. It's going to be called Ulano Screen Degreaser. And we're going to use this with a scrub brush. Basically going to spray some of it on the front part of the screen after it's been wet down a little bit. And we're going to scrub it till we see bubbles. And the thing about a screen is whatever we scrub on one side is probably going to get pushed over to the other. So we're going to have to stop, flip the screen around, do the same thing to the other side before we actually rinse it off towards the end, before we're actually ready to put our stencil on in our next step. All right, so your instructors are going to take an extra second here to just kind of re-emphasize the fact that although no one really likes to sit over here with a scrub brush and scrub this thing clean, if you don't, you're going to wind up with a stencil, and that's going to be the part that's going to go on top of here next. It's basically not going to stick to it. If it doesn't stick to it, it's going to make your screen print basically fail at the end. And instead of just your design coming out, your whole stencil is going to come off, and that's not going to be good. So nobody likes going back to the beginning. So really take your time here. You want to count to at least 30 seconds in the back of your head, probably during each side, as you scrub the screen to make sure that you're not breezing through it. Because if you rush this, it's really not worth it in the end. So at this point, hopefully you have a design that you have in mind and you've printed it on this transparency, and this is going to become our positive. And this is basically the image that we want to end up having basically burned into our stencil on our frames. So the way this is going to work is we're going to use some stuff that's called photo emulsion stencil, and we're going to find that in this black tube right here. This is going to typically be an instructor type deal where you will come to us with your design and we'll figure out how much of the stencil we need to cut for you. Why is it in this tube? Well, the stuff is basically going to be photoreactive, which means that when it's exposed to the light in the room, it's going to start getting attacked. We don't want that to happen. We want to make sure that we keep it in this tube when we're not using it and we're not exposing it. So that kind of keeps things nice and simple. When we start making our actual frames here, we're going to take this over to the mercury exposure system, and we're going to lay your positive image right on top of the photoreactive stencil that we put on your screen. And what it's going to wind up doing is it's going to harden everywhere around your image that hasn't been covered up by the transparency. And when we rinse it out with water later, your image is going to fall out and it's going to end up looking just like that.
3, 2, 1.
All right, so at this point, you've left your screen in the dark room overnight and your stencil has been applied, and we can see here that now it has kind of like an opaque look to it, and that's actually a sticker that's going to be pulled off, revealing our translucent emulsion backing. This guy right here is our positive, or our image, and we're going to end up burning this into the design using our mercury exposure system over here, and that's going to allow us to have our design basically cut into our stencil.
3, 2, 1.
So the first step that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to start the backing here, kind of peeling it off from the corner, and we're going to pull it directly away from us, and it kind of peels off just like you see here. They can be tricky to start at the outside corners, but this is the cover that was protecting our stencil. So now what we're going to wind up doing is taking our positive image right here, and we're going to lay it down on our screen, basically how you would see it in a mirror. So we don't want to look at this as a positive. With the screen up facing us, we want to make sure that we are actually looking at the inverted image, because when this gets exposed and we go ahead and rinse out the stencil later, it's going to leave the image that we want to see, because if we had it as a positive and then we went ahead and screen printed that, it would wind up printing backwards, and we don't want that. So making sure that it's reversed here or inverted is very important. So this is our mercury exposure system, and the way this is going to work is it's basically going to go ahead and hammer our stencil here with high energy light. Wow, I blew it. Cut. All right, so this is our mercury exposure system, and the way this is going to work is it's basically going to attack our stencil here with some high energy light. And what's going to wind up happening is it's going to go ahead and kind of soften up our stencil in the places here that we have all of the dark colors here on our transparency. So the end result here is we are going to basically harden up the stencil everywhere around the black, leaving the spot in the middle here kind of soft, so that when we hit it with water later, it's going to rinse and fall right out.
3, 2.
All right, so if you can basically make popcorn in a microwave, you can expose a screen with our mercury exposure system. It's really that easy. So the first thing we're going to need to do is turn the machine on, and our power switch is located right up here, pretty clearly labeled power. And we turn it on, and we're going to get some blinky lights up here. You can actually hear a motor turn on, and we can kind of see visually that we have the machine on. So the next step is we got to open it up, and there's a latch in the front, and this kind of locks it in. And we're going to open this exposure unit up, and it's got these hydraulic cylinders here that kind of keep it from slamming shut, which is nice. And you're going to notice these two little green tubes here. What they're going to do is they're going to actually help us pull air out of this whole exposure system unit. It's going to wind up squeezing your screen up against the glass to give us a really good burn. So when we set our screen in, you're going to want to make sure that it's oriented just like you see mine. We double check that our image is in fact reversed, and you're going to want your instructor to check that for you. And these two tubes are going to want to go right underneath the screen. Getting this oriented correctly in here is going to be critical, because it's going to allow the unit to make a nice seal all the way around the outside, so that when we turn the vacuum on, it's going to pull that screen right up into the glass. So next, we're going to go ahead and bring it down nice and slow. We don't want to slam it. And we're going to latch it up just like you see here. So now it's locked, and everything's ready to go. So up here on the instrument panel, we have a couple things going on. We're going to want to turn on the vacuum first by turning on the vacuum switch. You're going to hear a pump go, right? And it's right now basically pumping air out of the screen itself. And you might have to help it out a little bit. Sometimes the corners here need a seal. There we go. You're going to see it shoot up, and it should level out around 10 psi, because that's the amount of pressure that we're seeing dropped inside the unit. If you ever see that number exceed 10 psi, you're going to want to quickly shut it off and call your instructor over, and they're going to help you get it dialed back in. So the adjustment for vacuum is here, though you should never have to touch that. Over here, you can think of this as our timer. And I believe our time that we've been using with great success has been 150 units. Now, a unit does not equate directly to a second. It's fairly close, but for what we do, 150 units of time should be a good starting point for our exposure. So we're simply going to set it to 150. We're also going to make sure we add that other 0 in, because of course if you have 15 on there, it's not going to be nearly long enough. So we can hear that the vacuum is working. We're at 10 psi up here, and we're at 150 units, and we are ready to rock. The last step here is we're going to hit the S button. It's going to start it's going to initiate our mercury exposing here, and you're going to see the bulb start to heat up. It is going to take a few minutes for it to reach full strength. That's typically fine. You're going to want to make sure, guys, that you're not looking up into this thing at all. That bulb is extraordinarily bright. It can cause damage to your eyesight if you look directly at it. So we're going to let this thing finish up. So at this point, our time is up. The light has kind of shut itself down, and we can see we still have vacuum over here. We're going to want to make sure we shut the vacuum off before we do anything else. You should see that needle come down, indicating that the pressure under here has dissipated. And on the power side now, we can shut our machine down by just hitting the power button. and we're free to go ahead and open up our unit here and take our screen back out. So it's as simple as unlatching it, slowly pulling it up, and of course this may have a little residual vacuum in it. And being careful here not to let this slam, we can go ahead and take our screen out. And we can't really see anything yet on our actual stencil, but this thing is ready to go ahead to a sink quickly. We want to work fairly quick now, and we want to rinse out our design. All right, so we're here at the sink, and what we're going to do now is we're going to rinse out our design. The water temperature should be relatively cool, so we're going to roll with the cold water setting. And you're going to want to make sure that you're spraying kind of in a downward direction, and we're spraying into the front of the screen. So notice the orientation is very important here. We're spraying right into this side, and I'm also going to kind of go back and forth around my design area. And what we should see happening here shortly, and it doesn't necessarily work instantly, is our design should start actually falling right out of the stencil. And this could take a little bit, and it does require a bit of patience. If you would like to help it along without using your nails, you can very, very gently just drag your hand across your stencil here, and sometimes that'll help get some stubborn areas out. But I can already see my design is starting to lighten up already in spots, and it should start actually blowing right out. Also, notice the angle that I'm spraying at, guys. I'm kind of shooting downward. I'm not aiming it directly at the screen because that would bounce water right back all over me. And this one looks like it might come out. So at this point, if you've done your job and the screen was really clean when you went ahead and mounted your stencil, chances are everything's going to turn out okay. If you had any debris or any dirt or any grease, some of which you can't really even see with the naked eye, on your screen when you mounted your stencil, you may see things happening like the stencil might actually start peeling off. Parts of your stencil that shouldn't be blowing away or rinsing away may actually go away as well. So if, unfortunately, that does happen, you might have to go back and mount another stencil on a screen and make sure that we get it super clean this time. Yeah, buddy. All right, so guys, this is the point where you're going to want to really make sure that once all of the screen or your design here is kind of see-through or clear, you're going to stop as soon as it's all blown out, because what we don't want to do is rinse away too much of the stencil and kind of mess up our design. So when you're done, or you think you're done, you can take it and hold it up to the light. We've got a nice whiteboard behind us here, but you guys can see that this looks pretty good. This one is ready to rock for our next step, which is going to be applying blackout. So at this point, we've let our screen dry, and it has to dry because this stuff that we're going to put on it is called blackout, and this stuff is water soluble. So if the screen was still wet and we put the water soluble blackout on it, you guys can imagine that it kind of wouldn't play nice together and it would run all over the place. So what we need to do first is make sure your screen is in fact dry, which ours is, and it is now ready to block out. Well, the whole point here is that when we screen print now, the ink's going to go through anywhere you can see daylight. So you can hold this up and we can pretty clearly see that our design is going to come out pretty nice. We do have some issues over here I'm going to have to take care of with some tape later, but that's no big deal. If you do see small tears in your screen, we can repair them with tape and a combination of tape and blackout. So the goal is that we want to make sure that we can only see light where we want ink to pass through, because right now if we put our shirt under this and we went ahead and screen printed it, we'd have ink going through all over the place if we missed our stencil on any side. And there may even be some little tiny spots in here that we would want to touch up to make sure that just the ink is going through our design only, because we don't want to mess up our final print job.
All right. 3, 2.
So the blackout material here, if you get it on your hands or if you get it on the table, it's no big deal because, like I said, it is water soluble, which means it cleans up nice. So the trick to this though is that we want to spread it on, and we're basically doing a paint job. We're going to work from overlapping the stencil slightly all the way to the outside parts of our screen on every side, all the way down. And we're also going to want to pay very careful attention here because the screen is double-sided. So when I go ahead and put some of this stuff on, and I'm going to work, I like to work right around the outside and kind of push it out towards the outside perimeter of my screen. The deal is I want to make sure that I'm keeping this stuff away from my design and just overlapping that and kind of pulling it out. And notice how nice and smooth it applies. That's because I'm using the cardboard applicator here, and I've got it at a very straight angle. I'm not dragging it, and I'm not really like pulling it through the screen. I'm using it with the sharp edge, and I'm keeping it kind of slightly cupped to kind of make a blade with it. And we're basically plowing around all of our blue stencil material. Well, what we can do here is we can spend a good amount of time on this side, and I'm going to push it around as much as I can and try and get as much use out of the stencil as I possibly can. It's very important here, though, to make sure that none of that blue stuff gets in your design. If it does get in your design, it's going to basically stop the ink from flowing when we print there, and it's going to cause major problems for your final print output, and that's kind of what we're trying to avoid here. So I'm going to show you what not to do. Do not drag the cardboard like this, because if you drag it, you're going to drag fibers from the cardboard right into the screen material here, and that's no good. So we're going to keep on kind of pulling it away in every direction and making sure that I'm utilizing as much of that blue blackout as I possibly can. Well, here's the issue. You're going to get to a point here where you think that you're all done, and you've put a whole boatload of the stencil on here, or the blackout, and in reality, all you've done is you've pushed it through to the other side. It's very important that you look on the other side, because you see here I've got a nice big glob of it that I can move around. And as you apply blackout to one side of the screen, you're essentially pushing it through to the other. And I'm going to kind of try and I'll exaggerate this here and demonstrate it for you in 1 second. So I'm going to add quite a bit here on this bottom, and I'm going to keep on moving. And again, our final output here is we want to paint this thing blue all the way down. And making sure that I hit this overlap. You don't want any white showing. It's kind of what we're trying to avoid. So I'm going to lay this on fairly thick just to kind of prove a point, to show you that when I apply this, it is in fact going over to the other side. Also, notice that when I apply this stuff, much like painting, we want it to be nice and even. It should be a fairly even consistency all the way through. We shouldn't see any real lights or darks. And now you can see pretty clearly here that it just got pushed through to the back. And I can take this, and now I can keep moving the stencil on the back, much like I did the other side. So we're going to keep this going, and we're going to work all the way to the outsides here and the outer limits of our screen on both sides of the screen. It's very important, because what you're doing is you're giving yourself all that room for error when we get to the actual printing piece, and you're going to be a much happier person over there and a much more successful printer when we have a lot of blackout here on all sides.
2.
So here we have our finished blackout, and you can see that when you hold this up to the light, there's no light showing anywhere near the outsides of our design, and I have a pretty good cushion built up in every direction, so that when I go ahead and print this thing, I'm not going to have any ink going through unless it's in the spots where I want it to go through for my design. So to double check this, you kind of hold it up to the light again, and you want to look for any pinholes, because it's very easy to miss spots. And if there's any pinholes you might notice, that's a time to touch it up with blackout one more time before you print. We can also, like I said, if we're in a bind, we can use small pieces of masking tape to mask them off if we have to, but that's kind of a last resort, and we want to try and get it done right with blackout first, so we don't have to do that later. So this is basically ready to take over to the screen press and get our practice prints going and eventually line up our t-shirt for a print.
2.
All right, so before we get rocking here, there's a few tools we have to get together. The squeegee here and the ink knife you're going to find in the drawer right here. It says screen printing supplies on it. This pulls out. We have a whole bunch of squeegees and ink knives, and that's the first thing you're going to want to take care of. We're also going to want to get some masking tape together for our test print and a few sheets of paper. Also, the big thing here is the actual ink itself. Well, you guys can see that this ink bucket is particularly messy. We're going to want to try and make sure that when we put this away that we kind of wipe off the edges a little bit better than this was put away, just to make for a much easier cleanup. And also I put this on a scrap sheet of paper here so that if I, during the course of my print job, I slop any ink off, I don't have to worry about cleaning it up off the table. I can just basically throw out that sheet of paper and I'm good to go. So that's about it for all the material that you need so we can start our test print. Of course, you need a sheet of paper to print on, and we've already got that taken care of. So I think we're ready to line up a test print.
And 3, 2.
All right, so we have our screen, and we're just about ready to set it up in the actual screen press. You're going to start by loosening up these clamps over here and making sure that the arm is in the up position. This is spring-loaded, of course, so if you come over here and it's down, you can lift it up. Of course, whichever one you use is kind of up to you. It's personal preference. This setup right here is designed so that if we had a design or a print that had multiple colors and different layers, we could set them all up to print one after another and rotate it. But for our job here, for our first test print, we're going to do a single one-color job. So the first thing I want to do is make sure I get it lined up with my design kind of on the bottom part here toward the table. And you can see that the actual frame here is showing my design, so I can read it this way. And I haven't tightened anything up yet. I'm leaving it nice and loose so it can be adjusted. And we're going to kind of dial it in by eye. And we want to get the design piece here kind of right over the center, roughly, of the area that we're going to print on. Once you kind of eyeball it and make sure that it's fairly straight to the eye, we're going to go ahead and gently tighten up these clamps. You don't have to tighten them really hard. We're just going to kind of hand snug them for now. We can make any fine adjustments that we need to later. So then I can lift it up. And now we're going to make some fine adjustments over here. Here I have my sheet of paper. And of course, we're going to print on paper first because it makes no sense to print on your shirt first. If we want to make a mistake, we want to make a mistake on paper. So we want to make sure of a few things. We want to make sure here that our design is fairly centered in the area that you want it to be on your shirt. We also want to make sure that when we bring down our screen that it's actually going to be falling directly on that area. Well, the best way to do this is to get down kind of where I'm looking, look straight at your workpiece, and you're going to want to kind of gauge on both sides where you think your design is going to fall. Of course, we could use a ruler and line this up precisely on both sides if we wanted to. There's a bunch of different methods that we could line this up with, but personally I like to line it up by eye, looking at it from the center, and maybe pick a point on the design that we know is going to lie dead center. In this case, I know that my Y is just about down the middle of my design, so I'm looking for that Y to be right down the middle when I line this up. So that is in fact the case here. So lastly, I want to make sure that my piece of paper here is secured down to our table because we're going to be not only printing on it, we're also going to be heating it quickly to kind of set our ink here. So I'm just going to do 4 corners here, making sure that it's fairly straight. And you can see here that I've already made a mistake. This side is a little bit bigger than that one, and I caught that before I taped this down all the way. So that's fine, as long as we catch it now sooner than later. I'm going to move this guy back a little bit more towards center. I think I'm happy with that. And of course, it's never a bad idea to have either a classmate or your instructor double check what you're doing before you actually print, because sometimes having 2 different sets of eyes look at it might help you out a little bit. And make sure it's nice and flat. All right, so now our test piece of paper is mounted securely. We have our frame lined up. Lastly, I'm going to verify that nothing is moved at all and that I'm still happy with where my design falls. And in this case, if I'm looking at this, it does appear that my design is centered left to right. It is centered vertically. I am ready to rock and ready to give my test print a shot.
3, 2, 1.
So here we have our heat flasher, and we're going to use this to actually kind of set the ink on our screen printing jobs. So while we're finishing up, finalizing our setup over here, it's not a bad idea to get this thing preheated so that when we get to use it, it's going to be nice and hot. Well, there's some common sense items over here for using this piece of equipment. You're going to find the handle here. You'll also find the handle over here. This is where you're going to want to primarily handle the heater from. There is a red switch on the back with a green light. Okay, you should be able to see that fairly well here. When we turn it on, it is going to get hot, and the green LED turns on. When it is in the down position, the machine is off. However, this will be hot for a while after it's been on. Do not grab this down here at all or make any contact with the sides of this machine. It will be extremely hot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to basically pretend that anything underneath this thing, directly under it, is going to get burned. Now, if we get lazy, we kind of get distracted, we bring the heater over the table, and we walk away, we run the risk of doing things like this. This was scorched a little bit. Not a huge deal because it didn't catch fire, but the probability for fire is there. So we want to make sure that when this thing's hot, it is swung away from everything that it can catch on fire. In this case, I want to kind of wheel it back into the corner, and it is over a steel trash can that is not going to be lighting up at all. So there is nothing flammable in this trash can, or else this would be a terrible idea. So it's just basically an empty trash can. We know it's metal. It's not going to burn. So this is out of the way, and actually it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to pull this trash can out of here as well, just to give us a little bit more room. We're going to put this guy in the corner. All right, cut that, Steve. So I've rolled the heat flasher over here out of the way. There's absolutely nothing underneath the heat flasher that's going to be burned or damaged by the heat. So this is a good place for it. So we have to kind of pay attention to that while we're working and make sure that when this table spins around, you guys can see that there's absolutely no way it's going to get hit and no way it's going to be over a table. So we're in good shape, and we can go back to setting up and starting our print. All right, so some last tips and tricks here while you're setting up. If you find for some reason that when you bring your screen down, your design here is going to be too high or too low, you can make adjustments here by moving the actual frame. But if you run out of room up here and you've got the screen as far down as it goes and you still want to make a change, you can actually move the entire table. This table has an adjustment screw down here. It's hand operated. You turn it to the left and loosen it. It allows the entire table to move. So that gives you a little bit of added flexibility in terms of where you're going to put your design. I'm going to, again, double check that my design is straight, lined up right where I want it. And now I can just gently snug this up. You don't have to go crazy on these screws because you will over tighten them and we'll never get them undone. So now it's time to actually make our first test print. Got it, you cut there? That's fine.
Go ahead now.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ink bucket, I'm going to put it in a place where I can access it, where it's not going to be in the way and it doesn't have a risk of falling off a table. So basically I'm going to take my sheet of paper here. I like to run my ink bucket right on the floor. I'm also going to get ready with my ink knife and my squeegee, and I'm going to get ready to go ahead and apply some ink to our screen. Well, I double and triple checked my location here. My piece of paper is down, ready to roll. My screen is in the downward position. When you gently touch the screen with an ink knife, you guys should feel absolutely no air bubbles. This should be flat on the table. If there's any air bubbles in there, that's a bad sign. You do want to double check your setup. So what we're going to wind up doing is we're going to take our ink knife, we're going to build a nice little mountain of ink right down here at the bottom of our design, not on the design. We're eventually going to take our squeegee, and the whole way that we screen print is we're going to take that pile that we build, about a ½ inch high all the way across, we're going to take it and we're going to drag it across our image area. We're going to stop, we're going to flip it around, we're going to go right back across our image area and stop. What we're doing is we're forcing that ink down through our design into our paper, and then we're going to quickly hit it with the flasher and double check our work. So here's how it's done. I'm going to open up my bucket here, and I'm going to use my ink knife to help me out because this is fairly messy. And I'm going to grab a decent amount of ink here, and I'm going to run it right down here along the bottom of my image area. You guys will notice that this one has been used before. You can reuse a screen to do several prints. As long as you're careful that your block out is not wearing through and you don't have any problems with your screen itself. So I'm just spreading it out nice and even. And that's kind of what you want it to look like. We have a little bit of extra here on the knife, and of course I'm going to just go over here and scrape it right on the edge so that I'm not making a huge mess. I'm going to take my bucket top. I like to put the bucket top right back on so we don't have any issues with things falling into the ink bucket. And I like to set my ink knife right here on the corner of my bucket. So here we go with the squeegee. You're going to take the squeegee and you're going to put it out here in front of you. We're going to angle it at about 45 degrees, and we're going to pull it straight back across your design. We're going to go nice and slow. We're going to apply even pressure the whole way. Okay, so once you get past your design, you're going to want to stop. We're going to lift up our squeegee. You're going to notice you have a good amount of ink on this side. We're going to wind up taking this ink pile at 45 degrees and pushing it back away from us, stopping. And at this point, you can see we do have a fair amount of ink left here. Well, if you're screen printing again, you can leave this right here on the screen by scraping it down with your ink knife. This is going to be it for me. So I'm going to take my extra ink here. Again, being very weary of my cleanup, I'm going to take the ink knife here and I'm going to kind of scrape it right down, minimizing my mess. Now you can see here that worked pretty well. And of course, these two items that are all inked up, I'm going to want to try and pay careful attention to and make sure that I'm not tracking ink all over the place. I'm going to set them right here. So the moment of truth, we're going to lift up our screen nice and slow. And our screen print should come out. And this one came out really nice. So there's my finished product. Not only is it straight, it's lined up fairly well, and I'm pretty happy with this thing's overall position. And that's going to look pretty darn good on the back of our shirt. Friends.
3, 2, go.
All right, so we have our test print done, and we're ready to go over and flash it, because right now this is actually fairly wet still to the touch, and you don't want to get ink all over the place and mess up our design. So we're going to go this way towards our flasher, and we are going to simply pull the flashing unit towards our work. You don't want to make contact with the work. You want to make sure that you see a nice, 3 to 3.5 inch gap here or so between your heating element and the actual work. And what you see me doing is I'm watching the gap between your whatever you printed and the heater, and we're looking for a little distinct wisp of steam that comes out. That steam is actually water vapor escaping from the ink. So we don't want to see fire or flames or smoke. We're looking for a little bit of steam kind of escaping, and it's fairly obvious when it starts rolling off. So this does take typically 45 seconds to a minute at times. It really depends on how hot it is and how much ink you applied. So we're being patient here and waiting for our little wisp of steam. And now I can see a pretty distinct steam roll come off the paper, and I can swing my heat away, and my design has been flashed. Of course, it's still very warm, so we're going to let it kind of cool off to the touch a little bit. And I'm also going to want to make sure that my flashing unit here is in fact pointed out of the way to avoid any problems with the tables. So now that I've proven that my design is lined up, it's printed well, the screen's in good shape, now it's time to do our garment.
3, 2, 1.
So as you can see, our screen print came out pretty nice here for our work shirts that we did. And really quickly, I want to show you how you can make sure that you line up your shirt or your garment with pretty good success here without a whole lot of guesswork. So here's our table, right? And this is the same table that I lined up on. That is very important, because if we switch tables, you're going to wind up with your image in a different area. So we're basically going to take the shirt and we're going to open it up, and we're going to put it on much like we would put it on a human. Well, we got to make sure that the neck piece is up here toward the top and the bottom part of the shirt is down here. Well, this one's already been printed, but this is a really good way to show you an example of where that image should be. Well, if I line things up correctly, I'm going to look at the seams on my shirt, and I'm also going to want to make sure that any seams sideways here horizontally are in fact level. So this design came out very nice because we made sure that the arms were pulled out. You kind of gauge, and you can use your fingers for this. Gauge about a finger's width on both sides for your seams. Make sure it goes nice and straight. Kind of double check at the bottom here that the shirt is in fact nice and flat, so we have a nice smooth printable surface, and you are all set. It is important to make sure this doesn't move at all during the course of the print until you get this framed down and get your printing done. Once this is in place, the process is exactly the same as we did with our test print. We bring it down, we run the ink knife across and kind of level out our ink. We pull the squeegee towards us, we push it away, and we flash. The big thing with the clothes, guys, when you flash any clothing, if you sit under the heater too long, you can scorch the clothes. I've seen it happen before where a kid maybe kind of got a little bit lackadaisical when they were flashing, they turned around, there was a little bit of smoke, it can actually make your shirt distorted. It can lead to really weird looking kind of heat wrinkles. So you want to really pay attention to the heat. Just enough to see that steam roll off, and you should have no problems. So at the end of your print job, you're going to have a few things to clean, and it's very important that we get everything ink-free before it gets to the blast cabinet, because we don't want the ink in the blast cabinet getting shot all over the place, and basically it'll wind up getting fired right back on you, as well as peppering the whole inside of the booth with the ink. So we want to make sure we get it as clean as we can. You're going to find a variety of cleaning products back here. This stuff right here is Krylon mineral spirits. This works pretty good for taking the ink off. In combination with a variety of rags, and the rags may vary. You're going to want to ask your instructor for what they would like you to use for cleanup. But the things we want to make sure we're responsible for. We're responsible for the squeegee that we actually used for our print job, and this one I wiped pretty clean, but it does have some residue on it. And you're going to want to make sure that it's basically clean enough to where someone who hasn't screen printed yet can walk over, pick it up, and not have to worry about getting any ink on their hands. So that's kind of our goal. So once it's clean, you can typically take it right out of our plastic cleanup area over here, so it's not confused with things that are still basically covered in ink. So you can see here that we do have a decent amount of cleaning to do here. We want to get all of this nice and clean before we move on to any next steps for our blast cabinet operation over here to reclaim our screen. So this is important, guys, especially the areas down in here where the ink kind of falls into the area between the rubber and the wood, because we do change colors routinely and we don't want colors to be kind of mixed in with other colors. It'll mess up someone else's screen print here. There's that guy. Might want to do a quick detail shot of the, wow, that's an interesting looking bug, of me wiping the outside of the framework. That's a spot where kids often kind of slack a little bit with the cleanup. There it is, yeah. Do you guys know if there's any? Yeah, I mean, like I said, that'll work. I just, the amount of product to get that to eat off was. All right, so at this point, it looks like we're in pretty good shape here on the screen. I've got the majority of the large chunks of ink off, but an area that's often overlooked is the outside frame where you handle it. You know, this is a spot where you're typically going to see a lot of ink build up, and you're going to want to make sure that you go around that edge on the outside a couple times really well, and get the inside really well. Because you can see, like, look at this black right here where a kid basically, you know, did a print job or whatnot, and they didn't clean this black ink off. You know, you give that a little scrub in here, and then the black comes right out. So that was some black ink right there. We got some blue hanging up here that we can make go away. You know, just kind of give it a little scrubbing. So this is a step that will help a ton once we get to the blast cabinet.
3, 2, 1.
All right, at the end of your screen print job, after you've cleaned up everything and you've reclaimed your screen, you're going to want to make sure that your instruments that you put back into this cabinet look kind of like this. Notice I have no gloves on anymore, and I can handle this stuff without any fear of getting ink all over my hands. There's no gobs of it anywhere. This is fairly clean. There are some stains that will never really come out all the way, but this is fairly clean. Take a look at our squeegee, right? You don't see any gobs of ink anywhere in here. The handle is clean, and I can handle it from all angles, right? Of course, there is some spots that are dried on there, but do your best. The biggest thing, look at this bucket. take a look around the edge up here. We make sure we wipe it all the way around the circumference of the top here, and the handle is in fact clean. This way we can handle it again without gobs of ink all over the place. So this is going to make the screen print job run much smoother for your classmates that are using the same equipment. So thank you for joining us for a screen print. Hope you had fun. Hope you had a really good shirt that came out of it, and we'll see you in class.